Hey friends, did you know that Feminist Frequency recently launched the Games and Online Harassment Hotline? Well, we sure did. It is a confidential, text-based emotional support resource for folks who make and play games. You can learn more at gameshotline.org, and please, please help us spread the word so we can reach the people who need it the most.
What drew, I might imagine, these great women, Susan Sarandon, Cher, Michelle Pfeiffer, to this film is that it's a film that has something on its mind. Like, it's at least trying to, stir up these ideas around, gender and women's roles and, sexual power dynamics and things like that.
Welcome to Feminist Frequency Radio. This is the show that asks you to be critical of the media you love. I'm Anita Sarkeesian, and I'm joined today by two women who would cast powerful spells to not be in a group sex thing with Jack Nicholson. Carolyn Pettit.
That magic is already in place and is very strong.
And Ebony Adams.
We are throwing powerful hexes.
Oh, God, that's good. This week we're going to be talking about the Witches of Eastwick. Stay tuned. Hello, friends.
Hey.
Hello.
So I would like to share that last week, Carolyn talked to us about how she's been going on these long walks and that has been, helpful to your mental health and what have you. And
Sure.
you inspired me to do the same. So every day after work, work hours, I go for a 30-minute walk. And even when I don't want to, I still do it. And it's lovely. And I've done it every day except yesterday for the week. So thank you,
Nice.
Carolyn, for
Love that.
inspiring me.
You're welcome, and I'm glad that you are also finding the beneficial. Like, there's definitely that reluctance sometimes, that feeling of I don't want to do it today, but
Yeah, sometimes I'll be out there for at 10, 15 minutes being like, why the fuck am I doing this? I hate this. Well, so the other thing I'm doing is I'm not bringing my phone. So that's
good. Yeah.
That is, I'm trying to just leave my phone at home and not have anything with me. So sometimes I'm just in my head and being like, I don't want to be here. And then and then there's just a breakthrough that happens at some point in the middle of it. Look, y'all, I've been doing it a week. It's not like I've been doing this every
I know
day for a
exactly
year.
what you mean. That's why I was laughing. I was like, this is not the place I want to be right now in my own head.
Yeah. But I hope that I keep doing it. And I just, I was thinking about how people inspire people in different ways, in small ways, and you don't know how, what effect that might have. And here's a very direct effect. I felt better this week, and that was part of it. So thanks, Carolyn.
Hey, well, I'm just glad to hear that. You're very welcome.
I also have another fun fact that is not about my life.
Yeah.
In the film we're going to talk about, stars Cher.
Yes.
Who I'm strangely in love with.
Why strange?
Oh,
That's
I don't know.
completely
She's
rational.
gorgeous and
But
amazing.
fun fact, Cher and I share the same last name. So clearly we need to be best friends.
I mean, I don't know what you mean, Anita. Cher doesn't have a last name. Her name is Cher.
It's
Your
a
last name is
secret.
Altman?
Yes, clearly.
Okay.
Yep. Cher Altman.
Mm-hmm.
Could you imagine her name was Cher Altman? Oh, Jesus.
Well,
So Cher is Armenian descent.
Yeah,
Right.
she is.
That's cool.
Yeah.
I think a lot of people don't know that.
I did not know that. I thought she was Greek.
Yeah. Well, there is a lot of cultural overlap between Armenian and traditional Armenian culture and traditional Greek culture. So that makes sense. I don't actually know what her parents.
Sure.
I'm looking at her father was Armenian. I'm looking at Wikipedia right now. And her mother was claimed, Wikipedia says she claimed to be Irish, English, German, and Cherokee. So, which,
I feel like that particular mixture was a real popular one. That people to claim.
I love these white ladies who are like, but I'm an Indian princess. As if,
I'm part Cherokee. Sure you are.
Dude,
okay.
I know we need to get into it, but I once was, when I lived in the Mission in San Francisco years ago, it was Halloween. Oh, it's appropriate for the recording time of this podcast.
Mm-hmm.
Topical, yes. And there were 3 women who were dressed up in sexy Halloween costumes.
I hate this story already.
And a man taking a photo of them. Carolyn, it was right outside of Tacolicious. There was that like mural wall right there.
Yeah.
And so they were taking pictures there, and it was just super gross, right? It was like these like I've already laid the scene. You know what I'm talking about. And I was not having it that day. I was just in a fucking mood. And one of them was dressed as like quote unquote sexy Indian. I lost my shit on them as I was walking by. And the woman had the nerve to be like, but I'm part Indian. And I was like, I don't believe you. Like, I don't mean to be a dick. And I'm sure there are people who are listening that are like, how dare you, whatever. I was like, if you really were, you probably wouldn't be dressed up in like dollar store, stereotypical, like jokey costuming. You know?
Right. Yeah, and let me be clear. When I say like, I hate this story already, it wasn't about sexy Halloween costumes. I don't give a shit about that. It's because they're always so dumb. Like, they're so cheesy. Like, I mean, the ones that are actually funny and, you know, sexy in gigantic bold print, neon quotation marks, that, you know, are sexy but funny, totally down with. Or just like, whatever, you want to wear cuckoo, you know, lingerie, dress like, you know, Prince in the Revolution from the 80s, love it, you know?
Dreams.
But like, sexy Indian princess or like sexy cop or whatever. I'm just like, y'all, this is so tired. Just spend $2 more at Party City. Get a different wig and a different polyester costume. I beg of you. I beg of you.
And also, I feel like, you know, I don't know, this is a very large generalization, but you probably wouldn't wear costumes that made fun of your culture. You know, like you probably wouldn't want to participate in the like the degradation and the appropriation and the humiliation of your people. So fuck those 3 women from 25,000 years ago for their choices.
I would like to think that somewhere those 3 women are still talking about that Halloween. And they're like, do you remember when we were walking down the street that Halloween? And that woman, I think it was Anita Sarkeesian, totally started yelling at us?
Yeah. Well, you know. Okay, I have one more thing to share. This is total bonus episode
Love
stuff.
the banter.
Sorry, everybody.
Give me the bants.
But I do, because we're talking about Halloween costumes. I was just remembering the other day how years ago, I had messages from several people who dressed up as me for Halloween, going to their game studios, like to be the scary thing that men fear.
So was it hoop earrings and red lipstick?
Yes, and a plaid shirt, because the first videos I was wearing a plaid shirt. They're so good. Anyways, I was just reminded of it because somebody tweeted at me a couple of days ago, their costume from years ago. And I was like, yeah.
Oh, I bet they were so cute.
It was lovely.
Sexy Anita Sarkeesian costumes for everybody.
Okay, that is actually something I can talk about in bonus episode, because that sadly does exist. And we're just going to get on with the main now.
Okay.
All right, y'all. This week, we are wrapping up our semi-spooky occult-themed nostalgia watches with 1987's The Witches of Eastwick, starring Susan Sarandon, Michelle Pfeiffer, and Cher. The film was an adaptation of John Updike's novel about a trio of female friends who come into their witchy glory by surrendering to passion and the wily manipulations of Jack Nicholson as the Joker. Nope, Daryl Van Horn. I mean, really, the same character. Yeah. Upon arriving in the picturesque Rhode Island town of Eastwick, the devilish Daryl uses his impish charm to encourage the women to live freely, love boldly, and relish the divine power of the feminine or something. But what starts as a sexy, fun release from social constraints ultimately ends when the friends realize that, far from being different from the disappointing men they're accustomed to, the diabolical Daryl is just another entitled male jerk.
I had never seen this movie before, and I'm sad about it. I thought, so this movie came out when, all right, so if I'm 87, the movie came out when I was in my mid-40s, whatever. The point is, at the time this movie came out, I thought it was like, I thought it was about three women, kind of like a Hocus Pocus thing or Practical Magic, another movie I've never seen. But anyways, I thought it was about women who were already like, witchy and had their coven, and that they deliberately conjured Jack Nicholson. And I was like, I'm not here for that story. I'm not into it. And so I never watched it. And so when I watched it for the first time this weekend, I was like, holy shit, I can't believe this is just now getting into my life. Because for one thing, like you, Anita, I was reacquainted with how amazing Cher is. Like,
dude,
from her clothes to her hair to her attitude. This could have been a Cher 2-hour movie, and I would have demanded 10 more episodes.
I sent Ebony so many texts about how I was in love with Cher while I was watching this. Like,
and I was like, same. Yeah.
I don't know. Like, I've never had a problem with Cher. I've enjoyed her in the performances that I've seen her in. I love her as like a cultural icon, but I don't have a particular affinity. And I was like, I would like to go watch every Cher movie and everything Cher's ever done after watching this. Like, she is such a fascinating, she is so visually fascinating as a human, right? Like, I imagine that being around her is this sort of like charismatic draw that you have, because she's not this like amazingly, stunningly, traditionally beautiful woman, but she's so captivating and fascinating and like appealing, right?
Oh yeah, I mean, she's got like that Angelica Houston thing where you're like, okay, you may not have the sort of like soft, rounded, traditionally like Western coded, ideal female beauty. But you are, in fact, stunning and gorgeous. And I want to keep looking at your face. Plus, come on, Cher can sing and she's a good actor. Come on. Mm-hmm. What? Give it up.
I got to say, Carolyn, did you see this movie before?
No, this was my first time seeing it as well.
Okay, so we've all seen it for the first time like this weekend. I got to be honest. Mm-hmm. I don't know how to talk about this movie. Like, I literally was like, and even up to like just right before we recorded, I was like, I don't know what happened. Like, what is this movie? I don't understand it. It's so batshit. It is so batshit.
It is batshit. And yet there are things in this film that are so right on. Like, there are some like extended kind of, winking monologues that Jack Nicholson goes on about how men are trash. And I was like, yep, you're right. Got it. But then like ultimately the way the movie ends was so disappointing to me that I had to like, do some research online about it. Like I read some reviews from the period and some, recent kind of reminiscences of the movie and whatever, but also read about the original novel upon which it's based, which came out in 1984. You mentioned, Anita, it was written by John Updike. And apparently the book, which I have not read, but apparently the book is much darker in tone. And also it certainly does not end like 3 Men and a Baby style with the three women all getting knocked up with their, different hair colored kids and living happily ever after in the mansion of this devil that they've exorcised. Like, it was just so tonally off for me that that's how it ended in this very, like, literally pastel nursery. After the kind of like just fun, campy, just over the top kind of energy we've gotten from these women who are just like living loud with each other. And really, come on, like, Daryl is essentially just an excuse for them to be together more closely, right? That's my take on it.
Yeah, I have a lot of complex feelings about this film, but I don't know. To me, what's interesting about this film? So Daryl Van Horn, the devil, essentially, in the guise of Jack Nicholson, who, here delivers one of those just, I think deliciously like scenery chewing performances, right? The likes of which only, a few actors like himself and Al Pacino are even capable of delivering, and where you kind of want every once in a while a film to come along that gives them an excuse to just like cut loose and be like as absurdly big as possible. Yeah. So, I relished the Jack Nicholson performance in this film, but I think it's interesting, like, how does he seduce the women? Well, it's largely by admitting to them, right, that 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 women get like a raw deal under patriarchy, right? I mean, at least that seems to be a big part of it, is like the language that he uses is like, yes, men take advantage of you, men exploit you, you don't get a fair shake, etc. And and for the women, like there's something like refreshing about that. It works on them, in the context of this film. But like ultimately, I guess what's interesting is, of course, like as we said in the introduction, as Anita said, like yes, ultimately, of course, Daryl very clearly reveals himself to be very much just pure raw male entitlement, just another entitled jerk. But so there's the dichotomy in the film, right, of like the repressive Christian church and just Christian mentality in this small New England town that's tied up with like American flags and everything. And it's, this was 1987. It was Reagan's America. And I mean, I don't know, you get that just kind of, obviously it persists today, God and country, this white, sometimes bleeding into white supremacist ideas of like, anyway, Christian America. But so you have that on one side, and then on the other side, the devil, right, who offers what seems to be this liberation, but that ultimately proves to be just another oppressive trap. So what then is available to the women? And I mean, like, do they ultimately in the end find a way of making a life for themselves that exists outside and beyond the bounds of the church on one side and Daryl on the other? Or do they like remain trapped in that dichotomy in some way? I'm not really sure, but I think I think there's something interesting going on there with that, like that opposition between those two forces in the town and in this film.
I'm so glad you brought up the church, because the church and this sort of like, rabid, puritanical moralizing is embodied so wonderfully in this film by Veronica Cartwright, who dollar for dollar does hysteria like no one else.
Is that who plays Felicia?
Yes.
Yes.
Felicia,
yes. So, excuse me. From the beginning, again, I started watching this film and I was like, wow, this is not at all what I thought it was going to be, because the film opens on this very like, picturesque town, small New England town, and we sort of know what we're in for, or at least we suspect we know what we're in for. There's something so endlessly appealing to us about the specter of a particular kind of horror, usually embodied in the form of like out of control femininity in these like quintessentially American spaces that have very strong connections to like this colonial idea of America, right? So this is why these are often set in New England. And so we can talk about like the dangers from within, from, like this femininity gone wild. And then, the problems from like invaders from without who are bringing like big city problems or, urban problems to these like enclosed enclaves of whiteness, of, middle class living, et cetera. And so that's what I expected. But from the very beginning, we have Susan Sarandon, Michelle Pfeiffer, and Cher. I'm blanking on their names. It's like Alex, Suki, and Jane. Suki. Right. Okay. So Jane, and by extension, the audience, allowed to feel such impatience with the fantasy of America that's on offer in that town. So the dude who I think it's is Susan Sarandon's character's boss, who's been hitting on her, and who is delivering this speech, before the town. Like the women are like visibly impatient and just fed up with this guy. And it's their mutual wishing for something to happen to him, for his bloviating to end, that kind of catalyzes the recognition of their power, And so I was like, oh yeah, like this film is not going to be about, how we can return to a sense of normalcy, and normal being, white Christian middle class, but instead it's going to be laying bare just how insufficient that is for happiness for so many people. Like I was so excited. And again, that's why I was so upset at the end, because ultimately the women at the end of this film would fit right in place with the version of America they seem to be rejecting at the beginning. But in the middle, Susan Sarandon, like when she's going to the grocery store with no bra and she's got that great 80s perm and she's just living life. I was like, this is amazing.
Her hair.
I don't want Jack Nicholson to be part of this in any way. He is actively grossing me out, which he is somewhat supposed to do, but also I'm supposed to find him a bit charming. Like, you know, when Cher says like, you are physically repulsive, I'm repelled by you. We're supposed to then assume that the power of his charm overcomes, but I never felt seduced. You know, like I just couldn't quit being like, but it's Jack Nicholson. Come on.
You weren't taken by him laying in his robe on his bed.
Right. Well, I mean, and the thing is, there are actors who I probably would have bought into. You know, the seduction there. But I mean, ultimately, like what he's saying to them is not world changing. These are things that they already know about themselves and perhaps haven't accepted to the extent that they need to. But he's not like blowing their minds with these cosmic truths or anything, you know? He just is sort of giving them permission to live out loud a little bit. And so, yeah, there's also that problem. Like these amazing women need a dude to turn the key.
Yeah.
You know, for them to be fully switched on.
Well, so there's something I literally don't know how to talk about this movie. It confuses the hell out of me in so many ways. So like there's something about like you're saying, Ebony, like he turns this key, right? Like he liberates them from the banal the banality of their lives and the expectations of their lives and the expectations that were not fulfilled, right? That they did the marriage babies thing and it didn't work for them, right? Or that they're like control freaks and like liberating them from their control so that they can have true passion, right? Like there is something kind of delightful and decadent about their like mass sex group family that they've created, right? And like you're saying, it's also gross that it's like he has to be in the center of that. But then there's also something liberating about them realizing that he is, you know, just as horrible as every other man. And he is controlling and entitled and the devil. And he's vicious, you know? Yeah. Well,
like
and
he's
that
actually vicious.
So like I also felt weird about the end, and that's not just because of the CGI nightmare that I would like to unsee. But also like, you know, there is a sense of like they do take back the power, right? Like they literally learn the tools, like they learn his tools, and so they learn witchcraft, and they, you know, take him down, and they take over, right? And they create the life that like they want, so quote unquote. But again, it's complicated by the fact that both of you have brought up that like it ends with them being like, cool, we're gonna have his baby and like maybe he'll be involved, but I don't really know. But at the same time, it's like three women raising their kids together in this like giant mansion is super unconventional and against like the norm. So there is something kind of empowering about the way that it ends. Like it is on their terms, which I think is kind of fun and like a good value to proposition to share, I guess. It's just everything about this movie is so confusing to me. Like I think where I get hung up is like all of Daryl's lectures, right? Like those moments were the moments that I was like, okay, wait. So I get theoretically that he is saying what each of them wants to hear. And then they're validated by that. And then they decide to have a foursome and like have this happy quad family thing. But like the content of what he was saying like felt really weird to me. And I think that some of it is like the time period, like the gender roles and like the assumptions and stuff. I was having such a hard time trying to both like recognize that he is expressing the innermost feelings of these women to them and the audience, while also like very much in remaining within the traps and constraints of what they're fighting against.
Yes, he uses language that's very gender essentialist. It's very men are like this, women are like this. Women are nurturing. He says, I'd love to be a woman, you know, in seducing Suki, Michelle Pfeiffer's character. Like, I'd love to be a woman, you know, because of the things your bodies can do. You give birth and then you can produce milk to feed the babies. And it's all so I consciously, as I was watching the film, I was like, okay, I'm gonna like acknowledge that this is, it is very gender essentialist, and it's very much, as you say, like sort of the period, and try to like extrapolate out like okay, what are the ways in which he's talking about patriarchy, and not just reinforcing limiting ideas about gender by saying men are like this, women are like this, but so I'm like, okay, I'm going to focus on the parts where he talks about how the system is unfair to women, and like how women are mistreated, and how men take advantage of women, and all of that, because it's one of those things where I'm like, well, if they were making this film today, who probably, and they wanted it to be using the language, they wanted Daryl to be using the language that women today might like most want to hear from a man. It would be, I think it would be quite different. But I think they're like the seed, the core. There's something still in the core of what he's doing that is appealing, even if it's couched in all this really unfortunate sort of limiting, limiting ideas about gender.
I can't help but think about like. I should have done this research before we started talking, because I was like, what other movies came out around this time, right? Like in the like year before, year after, year of, because like these are very big names that agreed to be in this movie, right? Mm-hmm. Like they were big names at the time, right? It's not like these were like their first films or anything like that. Like this is a really big, notable, probably had a pretty big release. I don't remember. I was a child. And like there's something about it that feels like, really? Like they all agreed to do this movie. Like this was financed in 1987. Like that was a thing. But also like, I do think that there were a lot more like button pushing films that happened in the 80s and like the late 70s and the 80s, right? We already talked about 9 to 5. And so it's not that weird that this would exist, but it does feel like it's like it feels like it's pushing boundaries, even though to us today we're like, okay, buddy.
I recently on the Criterion Channel I watched a film called Clute, which stars Jane Fonda, who is also in 9 to 5, and it's this paranoia thriller about a Jane Fonda plays what the film I think describe using the parlance of the day as like a high class call girl or whatever, but she's so she's a sex worker. And I mean, while watching that film, which was in the definitely somewhere in the 70s, but I forget exactly when, it occurred to me like, there's a real appetite and an interest at that time in films that like explored in a real way, even if ultimately the conclusions they arrived at were like reassuring to the status quo. There's a period in this film where what it's doing is trying to like explore gender roles and gender power dynamics and those kinds of things. And I feel like, I think probably what drew, obviously this is pure speculation, but what drew, I might imagine, these great women, Susan Sarandon, Cher, Michelle Pfeiffer, to this film is that it's a film that, it has something on its mind. Like it's at least trying to like stir up these ideas around, gender and women's roles and like sexual power dynamics and things like that. I don't know. I think that there's something really appealing about that. And I think that, I don't know. A lot of conventional Hollywood cinema like doesn't really do that. And so I don't know. I think there's something refreshing about it when a film comes along that is actually like exploring that territory in some sort of real way.
Yeah, absolutely. I was thinking as I was watching this movie, you mentioned 9 to 5, Anita, that would be an excellent film. This would be an excellent doubleheader, 9 to 5 and The Witches of Eastwick. I mean, and not just because you've got, it centers around like these 3 different but women who have developed like incredibly intimate relationships with each other, and in fact, find solace and friendship and power through that. But because, I think there's something that's being wrestled with in the 80s, both, within women, but also within society at large. Just really wondering how to how to sort of situate itself with, increased access, increased employment for women, just all of the, expanding rights that women were some women were enjoying, with, the conservatism of the 80s, which had just like really fanatical insistence in a lot of ways on like certain forms of masculinity that could not be, trespassed upon. So I think like there are films that speak to each other that way. And I think, it would be really interesting to think about it. And I think also like 9 to 5, ultimately is much more progressive in its and consistent in its messaging than the Witches of Eastwick, even though the Witches of Eastwick has, like a kind of transgressive allure that I think, always happens when we have films that feature like the supernatural and the occult, just simply because like, you can have more fun playing around with, okay, well, what happens if, someone who has been oppressed and downbeaten all of their lives suddenly has access to, incredible amounts of power, not just like they can go out and get, any job they want, or, suddenly they're making more money or whatever, but they can literally like rain down a hail of frogs or choke someone with cherry pits or, whatever. But I think like it's really interesting to consider, as you say, like what else is coming out around this period, and why, and why these actors. Like I love this cast, but yeah, it's a very interesting cast to have put together.
I just pieced together in my brain a little bit more about the devil role in this, and it's like he is straight up a pickup artist. Like to a T, right? Like the language of puas and like men's rights activists, right? Where he says everything that they want to hear to get them into bed. When they revolt, he goes on a huge misogynist screed, right? Because I was just thinking about like that it was so jarring, right? Like it made sense, I guess, to the character or whatever. But then you have him in the church yelling, what was God thinking when he created women? Were they just a mistake, like earthquakes and floods, like, or were they made on purpose? Like going on and on and on about all of that. And it's like Carolyn, his performance was delightful. Like it was uncomfortable. And I recognize it in its uncomfortableness. It was just like the sheer physical freedom to just be zany. Right. But it was so uncomfortable listening to that, and also having that be the devil in a church, like in a place of like a white church, right? Of like really regressive, conservative, like button up, where like these attitudes and beliefs probably exist, more quietly, I guess, right? Where misogynist attitudes can exist. So like there's just a lot of tension that I think some was intentional and some wasn't intentional.
Yeah, and I think it's worthwhile noting that in fact, all of the pushback that these women receive in the town comes from other women, right? So Felicia, who goes around the bend, and then the women in the grocery store who, call Suki a slut, and then, just are like, kind of allied against her and her freedom. It's very interesting the ways in which, women are kind of the shield maidens for patriarchy, and how they get deployed right there. I mean, Richard Jenkins, who's also always great, it's just this kind of like bumbling, confused figure. He has no idea what to do in the face of this new behavior, from these three women.
Actually, Felicia's interesting because like, really? So for context, Felicia basically has a type of possession of some sort. It's not super clear, where she realizes that there is evil in the world, and she becomes kind of like a maniac, maniacal. Maniacal, thank you. Like in her spreading of like, oh my God, you don't know what's coming. There's evil in town, right? Which is true. Right? Like what she is sensing or whatever is happening to her is true. But she's also talking about the evil that's brewing inside of her while acknowledging the evil that's come to town. And then what? She gets killed? Like, I don't really understand narratively what her character represents, or really like what her character was supposed to do in terms of moving this story in some way.
Yeah, it's a weird one. So just real quick, going back to the John Updike novel, from which this film is based, the character of Felicia and her husband also exist in the novel. Her husband, the character played by Richard Jenkins, falls under the like witchy spell of the women and is, seduced by them or the appeal of them and winds up killing his wife and then killing himself in the book. Also, spoiler alerts, whatever, for this 40-year-old novel. But there in the book, Daryl Van Horn, engages in this like menage a cat with the women, but then abruptly marries this like very, virginal, sweet young woman in the town, not one of the trio, but someone else entirely. And in their crazed, jealousy, the witches then put a spell on that young woman. I think her name is Jenny, and cause her to die of cancer. Okay.
Oh my God.
Yeah. And then then at the end of the book, again, the witches don't become pregnant and bear little devil babies. At the end of the book, Daryl leaves the town with the brother of the woman he married, Jenny's brother, Christopher, who is understood to be his lover. That's the end of the book.
Oh my God.
Yeah. And so I'm just like, okay. So someone read this book in 1984. It was like, this needs to be on screen. Jack Nicholson absolutely has got to be our devil.
I have another question. What was the thing with the kids, like the babies all with their multicolored hair rolling up to the screen and then Daryl talking to them and then the witches turning the TV off? And like, and that came right after them talking about how they missed him, but that they needed to not think about that while they were together because of they don't want to bring him back. It was a
very like Beetlejuicy kind of moment for me. And I was just like, no, this is not the film that I wanted. I mean, granted, the film that I wanted, the ending I wanted would have been those women, except for Suki, who we wanted a child. But the other two being like, yeah, I didn't ask for this baby. I don't want this baby. I am going to exercise my right to have an abortion. I'm not going to bear the devil's child.
It was Jane. It was Jane that wanted the child. Suki's the one that gets pregnant too much.
Oh, and that's the other thing.
5,000 babies following her around.
Yeah, the fact that Michelle Pfeiffer's character, who is the mother of 6 children,
27.
is explicitly stated to be the most powerful of the witches, presumably because she is so incredibly fertile and fecund. Like, oh my God, every time this movie gives you something to be like, okay, yeah, I love this, it pulls something right back and it's like, it's just same old bullshit.
Which is very old school, like origins of misogyny around like women are nature, right? Like, whatever. There's this really great book called Misogyny or the History of Misogyny by Jack Holland, I think. And it talks about this, about how like women are nature and like, so you're either demonized for it and need to be tamed, or like because you birth children, you therefore are, you are precious, right? And need to be protected and put on a pedestal and all of that. So it's definitely pulling those roots into what you were talking about with the book, like pulling those roots into the way that it's thinking about the roles of women and the roles of witches even, right?
Yeah.
I want to talk just a little bit more about the setting of this film too. The beautiful, set in Rhode Island. It wasn't filmed in Rhode Island, but this beautiful like New England town, and where like, I mean, seeing it, the film opens with this beautiful shot of the town below. You've got church and these little winding roads and lots of green and trees and bodies of water and everything, and throughout it's so picturesque, right? So many like houses on the water and just this like gorgeous town. And I mean, there's something to me that on one hand is so appealing about it as just visually of like, oh my God, how much I would love to live in like a small town like that. It's just so beautiful. But then, of course, the obvious awareness or the inescapable awareness of like given the, religious conservative ideology that seems to dominate the town, and certainly like the whiteness of it. Like I don't think there's a single black person in this entire film, like literally, or at least, very few, if any. Like, but, for me as a trans person, like that is just not a world for me. Like that is not a world that I can like enter without my very presence in it, disrupting everything. And so there's that, that complexity of like, oh, it's so beautiful. I'd love to live there or live in a place like that. Yet being aware that like what maintains that like kind of whatever you want to call it, kind of, order, that sense of, order, undisturbed order, for the people who live there to some degree the absence of like people like me, right?
Yeah.
Anyway, I just found that fascinating.
This movie, so I can't recommend enough that people check it out if you haven't seen it, because it is weird. It is much weirder than I expected it to be. And again, you can pair it with some, other amazing films and just have a night of it. If you want just to have a like Jack Nicholson scenery chewing bonanza, you could go directly from The Shining to this to Batman and just have yourself a real good time.
That sounds exhausting to me. It sounds like
exhausting, or if that's exactly what you want, you're going to get a lot of it.
I don't know if I recommend watching this movie, but if I would, it's because the Cher, Michelle Pfeiffer, and Susan Sarandon as a unit, I like really enjoyed them together, and their acting. And I also loved the visual transformations and the fashion and the hair. I just loved the aesthetics of like, it was very deeply 80s, and I enjoyed that a lot.
I liked the fact that they had just pictures of martinis every Thursday, and cheese was on crackers.
Yeah.
It was a fun group of gal pals.
I did like the female friendship feeling toward the beginning of the film of their hangouts. Like there was definitely something really appealing to me about that. And like, I'd love to have, a few female friends.
Like your Sex and the City group, except not racist and transphobic and shitty.
Yeah, exactly.
I just rewatched all of Sex and the City, so I've got some.
The series? Oh, Anita.
I know. I have a lot of thoughts, things. I have a history with the show, and also rewatching it is like, don't do it. If anyone felt the need to, I did it for you.
All right, I'll cross that off my list.
Yeah. Okay.
All right, y'all. Are we done with this conversation?
I'll never be done with this movie. But yeah, we're done with this conversation.
Okay. We'll be right back to share some freakouts. You know something you can do today? You can head over to patreon.com/femfreak and become one of our patrons. That's right. If you back this podcast, not only are you helping us keep it on the air and keep feminist critical media criticism alive, but you also get loads of fun perks like early access to podcast episodes, very special bonus episodes, merch discounts. What else you got? We even let our patrons help us decide on new episodes and upcoming topics. So go ahead and check that out. Patreon.com/femfreak. Now it's time to talk about what's been thrilling us, moving us, upsetting us, or infuriating this past week. Ebony, you're up.
Okay, so I didn't plan this, but I happened to watch the NXIVM documentary, not The Vow, which is the more famous one that people know about. It's on Netflix, I believe, but instead Seduced.
HBO Max.
On
HBO
Max, okay. So I watched 2 episodes of Seduced. I should note, Seduced is 4 episodes to the Vows, I believe 8 or 10 episodes, which is why I felt like, okay, I can do this. It's on Starz. It's by a different filmmaking team. If you were someone who was into like the competing Fire Festival documentaries, then I don't know, check out both of these. But the reason why I watched it is because I read a very interesting article. I believe the writer's name is Ashley Harris, comparing the two and noting that Seduced is very much the better documentary for a whole host of reasons. But one of the primary ones being that it doesn't at all, sugarcoat or hand wave away any of the culpability of some of the people who are involved in the vow, including folks like Mark Vicente, who was very high up in the NXIVM organization. But some of his like bad acts and, coddling of and, endorsement of some of the more heinous activities of Keith Raniere, the head of the NXIVM cult, are left out of the vow. And they're given, full discussion in Seduced. But so what was interesting to me, and the reason why it's my freak out this week, is that it just so happened that we're discussing Witches of Eastwick this week, and the parallels between some just toad who's convinced of his own fucking genius, trying to just groom women, for his own nefarious ends, couldn't have been more clear. So Keith Raniere, who is this guy who has, exaggerated and, blown up his own, his own distinctions and qualifications, says that he's, one of the smartest men in the world, got multiple, graduate degrees in various branches of science, is just this incredibly influential figure. The guy is a hack. He's an idiot. And also, he has just cobbled together the worst parts of various philosophies and, new age teachings for NXIVM, this cult, which, like Scientology, is meant to put you in touch with, your inner greatness and genius and, pull you away from suppressive, literally using terms from Scientology, like suppressive personalities, i.e. anyone who dares to criticize the bullshit teachings of the cult leaders. But yeah, it was just so interesting watching this documentary, because you're watching footage, actual footage of Keith Raniere and his top female lieutenants spout the most misogynistic claptrap, but the people in the audience are soaking it up as if it is wisdom from heaven, because there's this cloak of legitimacy upon it, based upon the fact that everyone in the room is it's primarily white and upper class. And whereas if this were a group of people who were more economically disenfranchised, if there was more brown people in the room, the cult would not have been allowed to proceed as long as it did in the way that it did, and certainly wouldn't have the reach and the money that it did. But it's just, it's so baldly obvious when you're watching it from the outside what someone like Keith Raniere is doing. But for the women who were involved in it, they really felt as if he had allowed them to tap into something true and real and authentic about who they were as women, something that they had never heard before. But the slightest moment's review reveals that he's just recycling this same old misogynistic patriarchal bullshit that says men are like this, women are like this, men are logical and detached, whereas women are nurturers and carers, and men are not meant to be monogamous. And so, trying to curtail a male partner's activities is only going to end in heartbreak. But if you're upset about it, it's because you're choosing to be a victim. It's horrifying. And this is before we even get into the extremely gross and criminal way he blurs the lines between consent, and abuse. The way he talks about rape, just these horrifying ways in which people are victimized and traumatized over and over again. But the fact that it's this dude who is, ostensibly bringing women to this greater awareness of self couldn't have been more timely as I was, finishing watching The Witches of Eastwick. It was startling and horrifying. So anyways, it's on Starz. It's called Seduced. I encourage you to check it out. But I would like to ask you, Anita, how you felt watching The Vow, which is the other NXIVM documentary.
Yeah, I really want to watch Seduced now. I did not watch the Fire documentaries, so either of them. But I found The Vow really fascinating, but inconsistent in its filmmaking. In that like it did not need to be as long as it was. There's some episodes that you're like, this is dumb, or useless. But the Vow takes so the material from The Vow is really rooted around two people who were high up in the organization, or four, but really two, right? Were high up in the organization. And then the mother of someone who was trying to get her daughter out. And so they have loads and loads of follow footage of those people. And there's loads of footage because Mark, whatever his name is, came into NXIVM and started filming everything, right? And taught people how to film stuff. So I'm curious because Seduced, I just looked up on Wikipedia, is centering around India Oxenberg, which is, The Vow doesn't have any material with her, like interviews with her.
Interesting.
You only see her in The Vow through previous footage that probably came from Mark, I'm guessing. And the end of The Vow, I think it's 9 episodes, ends with like Raniere got arrested. And then it says, stay tuned for season 2. And I'm like, how the fuck are you going to make a whole nother season when what? His trial cannot be more than an episode. Come on, but whatever. So why I'm so interested in Seduced is because hearing India talk about like being inside the like apex of the sex cult part of this, being like right beside Keith the whole time, like we don't see any of that in The Vow. And clearly she got out and has some feelings or else she wouldn't have agreed to be in this. So like I think that could be, it's just a totally different perspective. It's like it's an insider versus outsider perspective in some ways, because the people in The Vow had already left by the time that you're getting a lot of what's going down with the accusations and it all coming forward and all of that. So yeah, like, and I'm fascinated by this story in general, just because like it's disturbing and strange and like cults, like what you were talking about, Ebony, is that like there is a weird appeal that some people have to, they are at vulnerable places in their lives and they hear certain things that make them feel better. And, you create a family and you create this like, it's exactly what we were just talking about with like, we would love to have a group of like, the 3 or 4 friends that get together once a week for margaritas, right? Like this is that version of like, plus, you have a community, you have, mental health, like your life is better because of it. But really it's when you listen to the shit that Keith says, it's really dumb and basic.
It's so ridiculous. And yet people are hanging on his every word as if, he's some supercomputer. It's mind-boggling,
Look,
and I'm trying to have empathy for people, and I do have empathy for them. I mean, these people were taken for a ride. Some of them are in horrific debt from the amount of, classes they had to pay for. You have people who were sexually assaulted, abused, raped, exploited. Like, I definitely have empathy for them. But it is hard to watch sometimes from the outside because you're like, how did this not ring any alarm bells for you? Well, and as you say, like one of the things that is so appealing is not the teaching, but the community of fellow believers. Like India talks about this, that she was 19 when she got involved. And she was like, I left college. I was looking for a way to kind of distinguish myself from my mother, who was this famous actor. I didn't know what I wanted to do with my life. I didn't feel very confident about speaking to people. I wasn't very outgoing. And yet here was a community. And, it became so important to me. So, as important as like, the 10 commandments of Keith Raniere was the fact that like, here are all of these women that I'm surrounded by and we're, struggling and learning and loving and living together, like that's equally as important to them. And so like when you attempt to pull someone out of a situation like this, you can't just try and like rationalize or show them like the irrationality of the teaching. You have to address this other need that brought them, that made them so susceptible to be exploited in the first place.
Totally. The Vow has a lot of like, I cannot believe how much footage they have and recordings. Like everything was recorded. And so when Ebony, you were talking about like the ways that any dissent was dismissed, there is literally conversations recorded that show that when you bring something up to Keith that's like, hey, this might be a little bit weird or I'm not feeling great about it, how he spins it to be about you and how you have to work the program and, you know, like this is your problem that you're thinking these things, not my problem. And like, because they've already been indoctrinated and the language that he's created around these beliefs, like they buy into it. And so also, we only know from the outside in The Vow about like the ways that they did like food deprivation and sleep deprivation, like literal torture tactics were used against the women, like in the, you know, the secret women's group or whatever. And so I'm like, I really want to watch this because I want to know, like, from India's perspective, what she went through.
In The Vow, did they talk about the SOP, the Society of Protectors?
Yes. And they have
footage. Because that's the part that really blew my lid.
Not only do they have footage of like their big meeting and Raniere lecturing his bullshit and spouting it out on and on and on and on, but they also have, so there was a crossover that happened between the Society of Protectors and the women's group, not the secret women's group, but the like not so secret women's group.
Yeah,
where
Jeunesse,
yes, where they would they like beat down the women. Like it was like, and there was all of you watched it, like there was the whole session, like I'm talking days of like trainings were recorded where they just like made fun of and poked at the women. And some of the men were like, this doesn't really feel good to do, but I guess we're supposed to do it because that's what they say we should do. You know, like instinctually, some of them were like, this isn't right. This is not how things are. But Keith talks about how like men have been pushed aside and women have gotten everything they've wanted and all of this shit. And so now it's time for men to get that and for women to feel that way. And you're like, what the fuck are you talking about? You psychopath.
Exactly. Like it blew my mind. So I didn't know very much about this cult before watching this documentary. Like I knew the broad strokes from hearing about it be in the news, but essentially, so NXIVM is kind of the parent philosophy, and within it there are, you know, several groups. This is for the listeners who have not seen these documentaries, aren't planning to watch it, whatever. I trust your choices. But so there's a male-only group called SOP, Society of Protectors, which is literally about radicalizing men in this like sort of like hyper militant, you know, aggressively hyper masculine way, you know, and where they punch each other and they force each other to endure pain, an effort to be ready, like a standing army, you know, to advance the ideals of the organization and to protect, presumably, Keith and, you know, the other people in power. It's scary. And then they have the women's group, which is Jeunesse. And, you know, Anita pointed out that, like, there's this, they came together, and I think it was called Jeunesse Tracks, where they brought the two groups together. And the thing that was blowing my mind is that you had to pay $50 a month to be part of, I think it was called, like, readiness drills or readiness camp. And what would happen is once a week, someone in the group would text the group of people and say, ready? And you had to respond ready within 1 minute or you were penalized.
That was a part of the secret group, wasn't it?
I don't think that was part of DOS. I think DOS had its own stuff. But so but it was blowing my mind because, you know, the punishment went like, and they could text you at any time. So you're having to live in this state of hypervigilance, you know, where you can never truly relax. You can never like go to sleep, because if you go to sleep and you don't hear your phone go off at 3 a.m. and text ready within 60 seconds, you might have to then stand in a cold shower for, you know, 5 minutes. You might have to go without food for a day and a half. You might have to, you know, whatever. It was...
Think
Oh my
about
gosh.
the amount of literal, like, and I don't want to say brainwashing, but like the amount of beating down of a person's self-esteem, right? Preying on all of their vulnerabilities, pretending that this is to the benefit of them, that they would pay to participate in this kind of
Yes.
abuse. Like, that's what gets me here. That I just, like, it is so predatory. It is like the fucking definition of predatory, right?
Yeah.
And I feel so much for all of the people that got caught up in this shit. And then also was like, well, no, actually, I think I have more sympathy than Ebony does, because I'm just like, I kind of get, look, I worked in self-help for a tiny bit, and I see what people are willing to put money to, and it's sad, right? Like, it's like, these people are screwing with you. Like, they are not real. They don't know what they're doing. They're making shit up, and you are paying for it because you're so desperate, because the world is so bad, right? Our society and capitalism and all of the different sites of oppression, compound to make you feel terrible about yourself, about everyone else, about the state of the world. And so folks come in and they're like, here's the answer. And you're like, yes, please. What do I need to do? Because you want to take the one pill that's going to make you feel better. You want to take the one piece of advice. If you do this one thing, everything will be better. Now do these 20 things and give us $50,000, you know?
It is. Yeah. It's fascinating.
Before we wrap up,
go ahead.
Oh, I just want to say something about race if I can.
Yeah, go ahead.
So in The Vow, it is all fucking white people, right? And like, obviously it's clear that NXIVM is mostly white people, except for there is a huge Mexican population.
Yeah.
Right? The one thing I wanted to mention though is that there is one interview in The Vow that is an anonymous interview with a woman that joined DOS, which is the secret cult. And the way that DOS works is that you are a slave to your master, and it is that same kind of like texting behavior that Ebony just described, except times a million, and you have to get branded and all of this stuff. That woman, who I believe is a white woman, was brought into DOS by a black woman. And there's no interview with the black woman, so this is all just based on her storytelling, and said, well, if a black woman thinks that it's okay, that it's like this slave master thing, I guess it's fine.
Okay, I need to freak out about this for conservatively 17 more hours. But I just want to say real quick, Seduced is by no means a perfect documentary. For one, okay, like I said, I've only seen the first 2 episodes. I don't think the last 2 are out yet. The first one is a little bit slow going. You know, it kind of shows its seams a bit. But the one major critique I would say of it is that so far anyway, whenever the experts, like the experts on cults in these kind of organizations, talk about how these groups indoctrinate people and how they construct a notion of like the interior group versus the exterior group and like danger from without and all of that stuff. They talk about terrorist organizations, and they are always terrorist groups from like the Arab world, you know, or from foreign sources, right? And I'm like, you know what would have been interesting is if we had talked about how this kind of indoctrination happens in the U.S. military, in law enforcement, in churches. Like when you're showing like these scenes of people, you know, marching in lockstep or behaving, you know, in these identical ways and deliberately patterning themselves on each other, you know, in obedience to an authority figure. Like let's unpack that shit at home first before looking to, you know, like ISIS child soldiers. As an example. But anyway, check out Seduced. Sorry, that was an epic freak out, but
no, it's good. I mean, I don't know if anyone enjoyed us talking about it, but I enjoyed us talking about it. Me too. That's what we're doing here. So, all right, y'all. If you want to submit your own freak out, you can do that at feministfrequency.com/freakout. That's FREQOUT. Thank you so much for listening to Feminist Frequency Radio. Stay tuned for the Freakin' After Party, which is only available to backers of this podcast. You can learn more at patreon.com/femfreak. This show is engineered by Rob Pera. Carrie Stimson provides technical support, artwork by Jamie Barron, and our intro music is by Phil Circus. Thanks for listening.
bye.
Later.